What we thought we'd do today is be a bit more relaxed and casual. We might do a little bit of mediumship today as well, depending on how we see how things go. Because one of the things we've missed out on doing since we've come home is mediumship with spirits that we've been helping while we've been travelling. So we'd like to sort of do some of that as well. So some of these groups that we have at home, we're thinking we'll do that as sort of interspersed with other things. Yeah. Remember last week, for those of you who were here, we were talking about principles. And also some of you may have some questions about material we covered while we were away as well, for those of you that have heard it. So we thought we'd sort of leave today up to yourselves as to what you wanted to do.
What you want to talk about.
Yeah. So open to suggestions.
I'll be brave.
Did you be brave? So microphones.
Hi, well, thanks. I have loved the talks. I've loved them. They're like, seems like it's new and it's different, and I'm hooked.
Why does it seem like it's new and different?
I just love how direct you are. It's like you're so direct and like I wasn't there, but it's like every single question I've been pondering over the last few years was attended. I felt like, even though I wasn't there, you were like talking to me.
Yeah.
And I love that, but I don't know really what humility means, and you didn't get to finish, and I'm just I thought I knew.
It was one of the frustrating things we found.
Probably there's aspects, but there's a lot I don't think I know.
Yeah. One of the things we want to do over the coming months is we want to have discussions about principles in a lot more detail than we've been sort of allowed to at this point by the audiences generally. Because it's important. What we find is when we use a word, such as you use a word like truth, or you use a word like humility, every person has their own interpretation of what that means.
Yep.
And it's really interesting when you try to share truth from a soul level to people who are listening with their head. Because not only are you listening with your head, but you're also listening really with your feelings that are all being tainted by what you believe truth to be or what you believe things to mean. And this comes right from your childhood onwards, doesn't it? Like, you're brought up to think a certain thing means a certain thing, or a certain word means a certain word, and so forth. So, and of course, the biggest area where that has an effect is love. For the majority of people, when you talk about love, they think you're talking about meeting people's addictions, or because they think that's love, or they think that when you love somebody, you just listen to them no matter what they're saying, and even if what they're saying is completely wrong. And the average person has a lot of quite strong definitions of love and truth and humility and faith that are all, from God's perspective, very corrupt definitions. And the problem with the corruption is that it begins in your childhood emotionally. So you could say you have an established set of beliefs internally that are basically defining how you hear everything when those words are used. So when you hear the word love, you're thinking, oh, that's what it means. And when you hear the word truth, you think that's what that means. And when you hear the word humility, you think that's what that means. All based upon your prior experience and your prior knowledge and your prior understanding of all of those things. And so it's really, at times I find it quite difficult to, when we start talking about, say, a quality like humility, a principle, which is really a principle that people must learn themselves to develop. And you're not gifted humility from the beginning of your existence. It is a quality you're going to need to learn how to develop yourself. And the average person, when you use the word, doesn't really understand what it means at all. And yet, because you've heard the word so much, and particularly when you've been listening to Divine Truth for many years, you've heard us use the word so many times, you start thinking that you know what it means. without really knowing. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's me.
Yeah.
That's me.
And then what we find happens is sort of a level of arrogance sort of builds internally, where you think you know what's being talked about, and because there's no emotional opening yet to the principle or the quality existing within the soul, you think you know, and you hear the word, so you think you know you're applying it, and you think you know how you're applying it, and you think it's all working, and you think you got it all down pat, and you don't need to worry about that particular thing. And so when you hear a discussion, and particularly a video discussion, you know, where it's been videoed or something like that, you hear a discussion, you think, oh, I don't need to listen to that because I already know that. And this is where we see a lot of people come into grief with the principles of God's truth, because they think they know things they have no knowledge of at a soul level at all. And it's only a sort of an intellectual understanding of the word, but it's not even the correct understanding of the word, because it's tainted by the history the person has from their emotional experience. May I say?
Yeah, that's me to a T.
Yeah. Well, it's everyone, pretty much everyone. And it's something we really notice when we're travelling. You know, obviously, you know, some of the hardest audiences we have are those who have heard divine truth before, but who don't understand any of the words as God would understand them to be, right? Because they all have the impression that they know what you're talking about, but they really don't know anything you're talking about at all. And so what that's required of ourselves as teachers is that it's required us to be a lot more direct with everyone about, no, you don't get it, no, you don't get it, and to be more firm about with people that they don't get it, they don't understand.
Well, that's when I realised it's holy moly, like I did the homework with all the audience and everything, and then when you were discussing the homework,
Yeah.
that's when I was like, oh my goodness, I went into a bit of a meltdown because it's like, oh my God, I don't know.
Yeah, that's right. And this was this was the unfortunate thing with the humility discussion we had in Ireland, so that's what you're referring to. And we got to discuss a lot of things of what it wasn't.
Because the last thing Mary goes, don't look at the board, it doesn't mean you're right to the board.
That's right, yeah. But unfortunately we didn't get to discuss much of what it was. And this is a part, I suppose, of your learning too. In a lot of ways you've got to come to understand what things aren't sometimes before you become open to what they are.
Yeah.
And if you don't, if you've already got a fixed idea of what they are inside of you, when from God's perspective that's not what it means, then you can see already whenever you hear the word, you're already hearing it your way, and therefore not really going to apply it the way God intends you to apply that from a law perspective.
You're not really open in your heart to receiving the actual truth of what it is. And we see this happening a lot with discussions where, in God's way in particular, you're not being humble. Yeah, I know I am being humble. I'm feeling about this or what have you, but it's not humility in practice. It's it's an addiction in practice, yeah.
And, we have mentioned in the past, haven't we, about humility as a quality in particular, that it is about being open to feel all of your emotions, whether they're painful or pleasurable. But that's only one little aspect of humility. That's not the complete definition of humility, right? Because the definition of humility has to include also your relationship to God. In other words, that you're a created being, not the creator, and that you're a creation of God, and therefore have some respect for God's power and authority. The definition of humility has to include that. It also has to include things like being humble to the principle rather than just your emotions. Right?
Or opinion.
Or opinions, yeah.
So the aspect of truth, am I humble enough to recognise that what I define as truth is not God's definition?
Yeah. Yeah, so yes, we want to have more discussions about those things, and Mary and I are trying to get a lot more direct with people about those things too. Of course, not everybody likes that very much. There's a lot of people I'm sure, who we saw this trip, we won't see again as a result. But in the end, it's the best way to teach, because you've got to, when you're teaching something that somebody isn't understanding at a soul level, you've got to get through all of the false definitions the person has before you can sort of have that connection to their soul, so they sort of understand what's being said. And that's the difficult thing about teaching divine truth using language or words. It's quite a difficult task, actually, much more difficult than the average person on earth really understands, because of all of these problems we have with language, history, emotions from our childhood, our beliefs, and particularly our false beliefs that we have about all sorts of things. And unfortunately for the majority of people too, the majority of their major false beliefs pertain to principles. And so, you know, a lot of people, when they think about sin, they're thinking about, I harmed this child, or I, screamed and yelled and hit my partner, or, they think of severe things, like I stole this, or I had a lot of immorality sexually in my past, and they feel about all those things. But most people don't understand that all of those things are actually less problematic, because they're driven by the principles that are out of harmony with love, which are the highest, they're the things that are going to cause you the most pain and suffering in your future, not having lived a life in harmony with principle. Yeah.
But I think, Deirdre, it's interesting, isn't it, when you've been listening to divine truth for a long time, say, and there's a level of pain that builds up in your life when you think, I'm trying to apply it but it doesn't work, or I'll give up applying it but now my life doesn't feel that good either. And sometimes it's that process of recognising how much pain you're in avoiding humility that begins to open you up to, actually, I want to get what this humility thing is. It makes us more humble, even that process. More humble to be able to say, I don't get what humility is. I need to sort of seek it out.
Yeah. So anybody who's helping you, teaching you, so whether they're in the spirit world and they're helping you progress there, or helping you here, one of the primary things they need to be able to do is to say, no, you don't get it. No, you don't get it. Just because if they don't tell you what you don't get, then you're going to go around thinking you do get what you don't get.
And that's what you were so direct with in that discussion. Like, that was like the best one I think I've ever heard. And you were just flapping your arms around. You were like going for it. I thought you were going to take off.
That was when I was talking about being a sin warrior and things like that.
Yes, and then I was like, what's that got to do with humility? What a warrior? What's it?
Yeah. Well, obviously, you can see, we talked a bit last week, didn't we, about how if you focus on your sin, how things can get quite negative. But if you focus on principles, you really are dealing with your sin. Because the more you focus on a principle, the more your sin gets addressed. So to my mind, like, focusing on the principle is the thing to do. And then you can easily identify your sins when you focus on principles. But when you just focus on sin without understanding principles, then how do you know what a sin actually is? You don't really know, right? And this is one thing we also notice: a lot of people start focusing on things that are hardly sins at all, or that are very minor sins in comparison to the major ones they're committing, not understanding that they put a lot of effort on that without focusing on the principle. So, we had a discussion in Canada with a group of people about their pets, right? That went on for a couple of hours. And, the reason why that discussion went on for a couple of hours is because nobody there could understand the principles, right, that were behind the discussion. We had another discussion in Belgium about chocolate, and it was the same thing. Nobody could understand the principles behind the discussion. And when you don't understand the principles, then you think things that are minor are minor when they're not, because often they're major, because there's major principles being broken, and so therefore they become major. And then there's other things that are less important, like what you eat, for example. So a lot of people worry about being vegan, but it's the principles that should drive the vegan diet, not the fact that you killing animals or whatever. Because what we found overseas, there were many people who were vegan, but they still had pets. Not understanding that those pets, there was a lot of animals dying for the sake of their pets, to feed their pets.
And they're harming their pets through their addiction with the animal, trying to have the animal meet their addiction. So they're actually harming animals, even though and
not only that, they're imprisoning their pets in their homes for life. So it's like, imagine if you were imprisoned in a home for life, you'd feel that to be, in the end, probably a torture, right? And they, in a lot of ways, they don't understand how much they're even torturing their own pets, right? And many of them are away from their pets all day. Their pets are trapped in a small flat or whatever. They're away from their pets all day. The pet's just there in the one place all day, and the pet sort of pines for some company that entire time. And obviously, when they consider the difference between that and the pet leaving this life and being in the spirit life instead, and they go, oh, I couldn't kill my pet, but you're willing to torture them for the rest of their life. So basic principles are being misunderstood. And so what we find is that in a lot of conversations we're having with people, that the fundamental principles are being completely misapplied, and not only that, applied in sort of harmony with the person's sin. In other words, wherever they feel benefit from hearing divine truth, they'll apply it then. But whenever they feel there's detriment from hearing it, they won't apply it then. Right? And obviously a person who's principled doesn't do that. Yeah. So this is, we will be focusing more and more on two things primarily, principles and sin. And principles are the way to understand sin.
Well, just even with my addiction to be heard, it's like, it's stopping the humility.
Yeah. I said to one group when we were overseas, I can't remember which one, I just said, I don't have to listen to you. Like, why should I listen to you when all you speak is like not true? Why listen? So, and also that you've got a demand to be heard, which is actually an addiction, and I can't feed it either. Like, so you add those two things together. Why would I listen? Like, I'll listen to God, and I'll listen to anybody who wants to share with me some more of God's truth. That's all fine. But when it comes to just listening for the sake of listening because somebody wants to be heard, what a waste of time. Like, you can spend, like, imagine you're in the spirit world for a moment, and you arrive somewhere in the first sphere, and you want to progress, and somebody comes to you and tries to help you to progress, and all they have to do is spend time listening to you. While they're listening to you, are you progressing? No. You're not progressing, you're not learning anything while they're listening to you. The only time you're progressing is when you're listening to them. And in fact, it's a very important principle to understand that you will not progress unless somebody outside of you shares with you a truth you do not understand. Because if you think you understand everything, you will be exactly where your soul's condition demands you will be. And in that space, you believe you know everything, right? And one of the reasons why you're there is because you believe that, right? So you believe you know everything, but you're in the first sphere, right? So you're in that space, and many people on earth, many of you are in that space too, where you're in that space where you believe you know everything, believe you understand everything, but the fact is your life is reflective about the fact you don't know, right? So here we are, we're there in that space. When somebody comes along to help you, if all they do is sit down and listen to you, all they're hearing is what you believe to be the truth. And what you believe to be the truth is what has put you in your current space. So is it the truth? It can't be, because otherwise you'd be in a different space, right? And so it's very important to understand that for anybody, to progress, you need to have truth come from outside of you. Now, the only way it's going to come from outside of you is about whether you can listen to it or not. And it's not about how much you speak, it's about how much you listen. It's about how much you're able to absorb and understand. And you're not going to, the more you speak, the more you explain it to somebody who's come to help you, the less ability you have to progress, the slower your progress is going to be. So there's very important things to understand about just progression in general. Yeah. Got it?
How do you become principled?
Well, it's not going to happen overnight, is it? You can't go from being an unprincipled person or not even understanding principles on one hand, and then overnight you have this magical change and then you become, a principled person. It's like the people in Portugal try to convince us that taking magic mushrooms would lead you there. Might transform you, taking some kind of plant medicine would transform you from, one state to another state magically. And that's just not possible. What is required is going to be a process of education, but it's going to be a process that involves your soul education, not your mind education. And we talked about this a lot when we're travelling as well, like the difference between a soul education and a mind education. If you look at almost every form of learning on earth at the moment, you see mostly it's to do with mind education, isn't it? Like you go to university for 4 years on a certain, let's say you do engineering, it's all mind education. It's all like, learning with your mind processes and procedures that you then can apply in life. That's not the same as a soul education. And a soul education requires the education in principles, and that's going to be a growing proposition. That's going to be something that you're going to need to engage. Now, so there's two things that's going to be required of you. There's going to be the education, right? But it's going to have to be based on the soul's brain, which is emotional. So it's going to have to be emotional education, right? Not mental education. And secondly, it's going to require a desire from you. And this is the other thing that we notice a lot, is that people sort of believe that you can be fed things without there being a desire from you to receive the thing. And there's a difference between intellectually being driven to try to understand something, which is frequently driven by fear and terror. So you think about, for many people who hear or investigate any form of truth on earth at the moment, most of the time they're afraid of not knowing, or they're afraid of not understanding, or they're afraid of how their life has become, how bad their life is now. They're afraid of the world when they look at the world and how bad it seems to be, in terms of they're afraid of people all the time. And so they come to truth, or they come searching for truth from a position of fear. Now, most people don't understand this, but when you come into something from a position of fear, you are unable at your soul level to understand anything, right? When fear drives you in your understanding. So, like the majority of people who have heard divine truth in the past have come because they're afraid of something in their life. They're afraid of things in their life not turning out the way they want them to. And so they're looking for a solution to that, right? But that's fear driving the process. And the problem with that is when you come to any truth from a position of fear, you are unable to grasp the truth at the soul level from that position. Like, it's completely unable. And yet, and this is why most people get in their mind about it, and they start listening to things and trying to apply what they hear and trying to do rather than feel, and all these kind of things. And so what eventually builds up over time is this feeling, I am doing it, when actually there's no change at the emotional level because fear is driving the necessity to do. So what is going to be required is a more open heart that actually says, I desire to know for my own and other person's good, for universal good. I desire to know. I desire to know in a sincere manner, not driven by selfishness, not driven by panic, not driven by the fact that your life is so painful now, or physically or emotionally or even spiritually painful now, and that's why, but rather because you just desire to know and apply principles that are, based on truth. Now, attaining that desire is one of the hardest things to do. It's very, very difficult. Because from God's perspective, you are not going to be able to receive much from God unless there is a soul-based desire to receive from God. And so developing a soul-based desire to receive is one of the most difficult things you are going to face for in your whole life. Right? And this applies not just on earth, in the spirit world too. Unless you have a soul-based desire to receive, you will not receive anything in the spirit world. You won't receive assistance, you won't receive help, you won't receive anything from God, any love from God, without the desire, soul-based desire to feel God's love. Nothing will happen, right? On earth, to a degree, you can get things done by just trying, right? But you're not going to be able to do that in the spirit world either. Right? You're going to be so dominated by your emotions and your feelings in the spirit world, far more than what you believe, many of you believe you will be. And in that place, unless there is sincere desire to become a principled person and to grow in principles and also grow in that relationship with God, which, by the way, is all about God's principles entering your heart, unless that happens, no real change is going to happen. So you can see that from what I'm saying, that developing a sincere desire is the trickiest thing you're going to have to do.
So how do you do it?
Exactly. So how do you do it? And it's this is something that is very difficult to explain to people, actually, what a sincere desire actually looks like. And because most people on earth believe they have one already, right? However, you can measure from the course of your life how sincere your desire has been in the past, right? So an example of that is this. God wants to give you his love every time you have a sincere desire for it. How many times have you received it? In comparison to how many times you thought you had a sincere desire and didn't receive. So you can, in that you can start to see, for the majority of us, when we when we think we desire something, what we're really doing is we're in a state where we're demanding something, right? Where we expect something. And if you look at it from God's perspective, God under those circumstances will not give you the love you seemingly think you're asking for, because it's not a real desire yet, right? So one of the fastest ways to work out whether your desire is sincere or not is to ask God for love and see whether you get it straight away. Now, the majority of people don't get it straight away. And the majority of people don't get it after 5 years even. Even after 10. Many who ask for God's love for 10 years do not receive it in those 10 years. And the reason why is because they're still not able to determine how sincere they are. Right? And God determines it, but they don't. They think they're being sincere when they're not. So, developing a sincere desire, what does that require of you, Claudia?
Yeah, I was wondering that.
What do you reckon it requires of you? How do you become sincere? Because it's going to have to come from you. Nobody else can do it for you.
I think it's by looking at what is right now.
What is true?
Yeah.
You mean?
Or what is happening?
What's happening.
Yeah.
And understanding what the negative effects are.
But isn't what you're just describing very selfish?
I hadn't considered that.
Mm.
I don't understand that right now, actually.
Mm. It's interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of times we go, well, sure, a lot of us have been in pain and suffering. We have pain and suffering, many of us right now, right? And so often the pain and suffering causes us to look at our life and go, I need to do something about this pain and suffering that I'm in. That is very true, but that's not sincerity. Like, sincerity would be to do it without being in the pain and suffering, wouldn't it? Yeah. That would be sincerity. So the fact that it took us to get to pain and suffering before we did anything is proof of our insincerity, actually. And so just because then we start asking because of our pain and suffering, we start asking, that doesn't mean we're now sincere. All it means is we're trying to avoid pain and suffering.
And the test comes, doesn't it, when we get out of pain and suffering, what do we do then?
So a truly sincere person would ask whether they're in pain and suffering or not. And in fact, many of your celestial brothers and sisters still ask for God's love, but they're not in pain and suffering. Right? So that they've become sincere by now, where they can have a desire to receive God's love, but not out of a selfish motive, in the sense of not driven by the avoidance of pain and suffering. So many of us start at the point of searching for truth from a point of pain and suffering, don't we?
Yeah.
You know, almost every new group we meet of people who we discuss truth with, most of the people are there. You'd say 99% of the people who are there because they have some kind of pain or suffering in their life and they want some resolution. Right? That means 99% of the people coming are not sincere yet. Right? Because it's driven by just to avoid some pain and suffering. Right? So it's driven by very sort of, you could say, very selfish motivations. Right? And if your only motivation to hear and listen to and apply divine truth is to avoid your own pain and suffering, you are not going to be able to hear, listen to, or apply divine truth. It's just not going to happen. And the reason why is because God measures sincerity, and God knows that anything motivated by a selfish desire is not sincere. The law measures that perfectly, and so it's already known. So while God is happy that you're trying to change your life so that you no longer have pain and suffering, at the end of the day, he doesn't measure that as sincerity. He measures that as logical. Does that make sense?
Finally trying to do something that's a bit better for yourself.
Finally, Claudia's not being stupid anymore.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. You know, she's not doing things that harm herself anymore, which is better than before. But you know, most of our sin is because we've harmed others, and we've harmed the environment around us. And it's not about what happened to us; it's about what we've done to others. And very few people in that place are looking at those things, right? So a truly sincere person looks at those things first, not afterwards.
I was just going to say about the principles, you know, I think about the principles is like, if I want to receive the principles from God and have them inside of me, it's like a construction project that I have going on, you know. And in any construction project, you've got to have, you know, desires and take actions and building blocks. And you're building, it's a process, like Jesus said, that you're building a framework for your love, for your giving to the world, for your ability to express. It's sort of like the framework for this awesome, if you think of like the personality and nature that God has created, you can like raise that up on this framework, and you can do things with it in the world that are giving, not just about receiving or avoiding pain. You build a strong thing that can go out into the world and give and share and work with others and actually reflect those principles in a way that's not selfish, and it's not about just, oh, I want to feel good all the time. It's because when you live by principles, initially there might be even more pain and suffering. You know, while you work through the sin, you have to feel some things, which is all of your, you know, corruption that you wanted to hold on to until now. So it's very difficult to become sincere about starting this building project, if you like, inside of yourself, of like seeking the principles, because you've got to love them. You've got to think that they're better than you just avoiding pain. You've got to think that, oh, this is something that I want forever, not just like, oh, I feel like crap and I don't know what to do with my life. More like, I want to receive these things and have them inside of me and live by them. And, you know, that's a measure of sincerity, you know, that desire. But if you just want to avoid your pain right now, or just get into a better place, or have a bit of direction, that's just a very, as Jesus is saying, very self-focused. And it's very difficult to build anything under those circumstances, because you're really just running from one thing to the other, trying to sort of do fix-up jobs of the really poor construction that's already there, rather than seeing, no, this is something that will, if I do it properly, it will be with me eternally. These principles will guide me to more and more growth and productivity, but I have to want them more than I want any other selfish ideal, and I have to think that they're good. A lot of us start thinking, oh, that's not good. I don't want to be truthful all the time. I don't want to be humble all the time. And so developing sincerity is also about letting go of all that opposition to the principle.
Yeah, if you think of it, we said last week that with the principles, they are more important than your life. In fact, your entire life wouldn't exist without them. And the principles are in God. They are a part of God's personality and nature. So the more you break them, the more you break those principles, the more you live in disharmony with them, the more you live in disharmony with God. Right? So the principles are far more important than every single person who's ever lived and who ever will live. They're more important than what you feel. They're more important than what happens to you. And more important than anything else. Right? And unless you get to the stage where you feel that, then you won't be sincere.
And you won't have a principled life.
You won't have a principled life, yeah. And nobody is going to be able to get you to that place. It has to be a place you get to through your own desire. It's not something, people can help you, they can educate you. So remember I said there's two phases. The first phase was the education. But people can educate you, but education without application is pointless too, isn't it? So unless you, in the second phase you go, right, this is about me becoming a more sincere individual and learning how to be a person with sincere desires rather than addictions, which are insincere desires. Right? I'm going to become a person with love, which is sincere desires. Right? Unless I become a person with sincere desires, then all the education in the world is not going to benefit me. Right? And you can have God educating you directly, and all of you do, by the way, have God educating you directly. And all of God's education is not going to benefit you unless there's the second half, which is your sincere desire to receive it and apply it in your day-to-day life. And that sincerity has to be something you choose to develop. God's not going to gift it to you. No one else can gift it to you. Only you can do it. Only you can create it.
Well, it's a process. A lot of what we teach is exactly about developing sincerity, but it's not a switch you turn on. It's like something you must develop by removing all of your selfishness.
But you can also see, can't you, that you've got to get rid of all the things that you're insincere about as a part of that process, right? So, and that's all of your sin. And that's why like in the Paget messages, we referred to the process of awakening to your sin. You could say that's awakening to all of your insincere desires, couldn't you? There's another way of saying it. You could also call it awakening to all of your unloving desires. You could also call it that. Or you could also call it awakening to all of your definitions of love that are the opposite of God's definitions of love. You could also call it that, right? So in the past, I've given many ways to develop your own sincerity, Claudia. It's interesting that many people are now asking us how. We're going, but we've just spent the last 15 years telling you how. It's like, so that, and it's interesting that a person asks those questions, is that indicates that even though we've been sharing and educating with you how, you haven't understood that that it's about developing a sincere desire. So all of the things we've shared with you have been, of course, aside from the external truths, which are all beautiful to know and understand, right? I'm talking about all the things we share with people personally in the sense of what they need to do with their addictions, what they need to do with their fears, what they need to do with their anger, what they need to do with their emotions, what they need to do with their lack of principled action. All of those things are things that you're going to have to give up in order to become sincere. And yet the average person goes, but how do I become sincere? And we say, we already taught you how to become sincere. It's just that you didn't know that's what we were teaching you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And for many of you, you haven't known that's what we've been trying to teach you. And we're becoming more direct with you about that now, which is good. But at the end of the day, and I hope we will even be more direct about it as time goes on, but without the understanding that that's what you are doing and the importance of doing it, then you can listen to divine truth for years and years and years and not even understand that that's the purpose of all of these things you're hearing, is to help you become a sincere person who's guided by principle. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's important for everyone to understand that unless inside of yourself that sincerity develops, then substantially no change will occur in your life aside from the change where you recognise pain and suffering and you deal with that. That, in other words, the only change that will occur if you do not become a more sincere person, the only change that will occur is where the law of compensation beats you into submission, which is really what your pain and suffering is. The law of compensation beating you into submission. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that is the only change that is possible unless true sincerity develops within yourself. And nobody can put it there for you. God's not going to put it there. God responds to it when it's there, which is not the same as putting it there. You have to put it there.
Yeah, and you'll look back on it and you'll go, wow, what a great achievement of my life. Nobody did it for me, nobody ran in and rescued. I did that. Yeah. I developed these things and I sought the principles, and it was only through my development of sincerity and my seeking of the principles that these things are now inside of me.
Yeah. Isn't that wonderful, right?
It's great.
Because it also means that, see, you could say that the first part of it is where other people share truths with you. That's the first, that's the education. Other people sharing truths with you. The second part of it is you imbibing those truths and it becoming a part of your life. That you became sincere enough to receive those truths and do something about them. So it requires both of those things. It's going to require somebody else sharing some truths, which requires you listening rather than talking, which requires you like humbly accepting, even though there are times when you're going to feel like, whoa, I don't know if I agree with that, or that's pretty hard to do, or whatever. And it's going to require all that. But the second part of what it requires of you is more important, and that is because and the reason why it's more important is that truth can be received from all sorts of sources, but none of it will benefit you until you're sincere. Right? Not a single ounce of it will benefit you until you're sincere. And So your personal development of the quality of sincerity is so important to your future that you could say that it's the most important thing for your entire future. Because without it, no other thing will be achieved with a sincere motivation. Right? Everything will be done out of fear or terror or, addiction or
just trying to distract yourself from
all sorts of reasons, denial, whatever. And yet, none of it will benefit you. You'll only end up with more pain and suffering until you become sincere. Yeah. And nobody else is responsible for making you a more sincere person. Nobody. Not your partner, not your friends, not your mother or father, nobody. God isn't going to ever take that responsibility, because that is something that is has to come from within you. Yeah.
And that's why there's many rewards, because it is something that you develop for yourself, that only you can do, and it helps you understand your potential as well. The greatness of God's design, your ability to do that.
Right. So when Claudia asked that question about how do I, understand or develop principles, the answer is, number one, getting educated from someone other than yourself. Number two is developing within yourself a desire that is sincere. And the education comes from someone else. The desire that's sincere comes from within yourself. Yeah. So whenever you're trying to prove that to somebody else that you already know something, then you're not open to the education. And when you're trying to do something only because you're in pain and suffering, or only because it's going to make your life better, then you're not in a place where you're sincere. And you can see, for the majority of people who hear divine truth, there's one or both of those problems that they face in terms of the reason why they don't progress. Jen, you want to?
So I'd like to ask about God in this whole process. It feels for me that God's having an individual relationship with me, so that my level of insincerity, my level of whether I'm getting it or not, is
Can God have a relationship with you without you being personally involved in that relationship?
No.
So
I think I've got to be...
So it's not accurate to say God's having a relationship with you?
Seeking. I've got to be seeking.
Well, you're just breaking the first principle that we just talked just now. But
right, since you got the microphone.
As soon as you got it,
You haven't asked a question and you're telling us what you know.
Which is exactly what I said to Claudia not to do.
Wow, okay.
Right? And the reason why it doesn't work is because now you're just explaining everything from your perspective, which is going to be based upon the sin you hold. And part of that sin is God would be having a relationship with me whether I'm participating or not. That's a part of your sin. You've believed this the entire time I've known you. You've believed that God wants a relationship with you when you don't want it. And you don't want one at this stage. You don't want one.
That's error, is it?
You think you do, but you don't. Right? Now, what you want is your pain and suffering to go away. That's what you've wanted the whole time I've known you. And, of course, it hasn't all gone away, has it?
No.
No. And so, therefore, that demonstrates that whatever you're doing is not sincere. You understand? So let's look at, you asked about God, how God's involved. Let's look at how God's involved. Everybody who's ever existed is a child of God. And God is personally interested in every child. But God doesn't have a relationship with every child. He's personally interested in every child, but he doesn't have a relationship with every child. He has a relationship with the children who want to have a relationship with him. But the relationship on the part of the child must be, the desire for it must be sincere in order for a relationship to be established. So the only way God can help a person who is not sincere is by a lot of other things that are external to the child, not internal to the child. You understand what I mean by that? So what I mean by that is that he's got to influence other people and other things to happen to you in order for you eventually to develop enough of a desire to have a relationship with him. So in other words, if there's some spirits that he knows that like Jen, he's going to try to influence those spirits to influence Jen to develop some sincerity, to develop a relationship with him. If Jen's in a state of sin, the laws are all operating, every day operating, to make Jen aware of her sin, so that she can awaken to her sin. So all of the laws have been constructed. If you think of all the laws that exist in the universe, the majority of them have been constructed by God for his children. Right? There are some laws that are independent of the child. Those kind of laws are like heavenly bodies move about, how the moon revolves around the earth and how the earth revolves around the sun. And all those physical laws, they are independent of the human to a large extent. They existed before humans came, and they will continue to exist afterwards. But there's a whole group of laws, all of the most important laws based on principles, are all about the human child, God's children. And God created all of those laws just for the children to become happy. And so one way that he can influence the child is through the influence of those laws that he created, which are an expression of his personality and his nature, and in terms of how he would like his child to act and feel, and also how he can demonstrate his own nature and abilities to the child. He can influence you through any of those means, but he can't influence you directly until you're sincere. And when I say directly, he can communicate with you through the conscience, but only when you're sincere. You can receive love from him, but only when you're sincere. Right? So there is no relationship until you're sincere. There is no relationship. There's not. A lot of people sort of believe that it's sort of like, oh, but I already have a part of God in me, and I already think that, God designed us. Didn't God design us with this spark that we really want God right from the beginning? No. If God had done that, he would have done it against his own creation of your will. So God didn't do that. You have complete independence from God until your desire for a relationship with God is sincere. And that's the net sum total of how God influences you. Right? So to presume, which you often have done, that God's in a relationship with you when you're not in a relationship with God, that is a false presumption. Yeah? Okay. And it's not true. Nobody is in a relationship with God until they are in a state where they're sincere. Now that doesn't mean God isn't interested in you, does it? Because obviously God is interested in you. God wants things for you. He wants you to be happy. In fact, he's such a good parent that he wants you to be happy even if you don't have a relationship with him. He even wants you to be happy then. Right? Which is very different to many parents, isn't it? They only want you to be happy if you have some kind of binding thing with them, with the parent. But God doesn't feel that way about you. He's interested in you, but he's waiting. The relationship can only be established through your desire. He's already got one for you, but it can only happen through you having a sincere desire. At the moment, Jen's desire is not sincere.
So to drop the crap And
Yep. What do you mean by the crap though?
well, telling yourself stuff
Stories.
that's not real,
Yeah, very important.
fake.
Yeah. We see this happening
Faking it till you're
a
making
lot,
it.
Jen.
I'm
Like,
faking it till I'm making it.
yeah, it doesn't work.
So if I'm drowning in pain and suffering,
Yeah. Which is good.
and I've got to stop the crap,
Yep.
telling myself I know when I don't know,
Yep. But now you're reverting to telling me things that I already know.
I'm trying to work it out.
You don't
We'll
have
work it out privately. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not my responsibility for you to work it out publicly or with you publicly, and also to listen to you work it out. Like I already know these things about you. I've known these things about you since I met you. So it's not like this is what I mean by telling the story. See, part of a very large addiction in you is to tell your story, and you've always had it ever since I've met you. You have this very strong addiction to tell a story. That's stopping you from becoming sincere. You don't realise how much it's stopping you either. And you think about it, for most of you, you think about it, you go along to visit an old person in an old person's home, for example. And you sit down with them, and what do they generally discuss with you? They talk at you the entire time, talking about what? And for the majority of you, do they ever ask you anything about your life, your circumstance, your situation? Are they ever even really interested in you? Or what do they do mostly? Isn't it talk at you about their life? Which is what you've been doing with me ever since you've met me, Jen. Talking at me about your life. Which, by the way, I already know better than you do. Right? I observed you. I can see you, I know you, I can feel you, easier than you can feel yourself at the moment. And so I already know many of the things about your life that you don't know, right? And so when you're talking to me about them, you're doing it to get a feeling of some kind, a feeling that somebody understands you and gets you, and somebody wants to listen to you, and they'll take the time to listen to you. And really, that's acting in the addiction to avoid the pain and suffering of your own childhood. That makes sense? And this is also what you're doing with God. You're trying to establish with God a relationship by not dealing with your pain and suffering from your own childhood. You want God to make your life better without you having to go through the feelings, right? Which is a very common thing that many people want, right? But it's not going to get you sincerity. It's not going to get you there, right? And so this is why, after many years of hearing divine truth, you're still not yet sincere, right? Because you're right. You're going to have to drop the stories you tell yourself, and also the need for other people to hear you. You're going to have to drop that as well. But you're in it. As soon as you open your mouth with somebody, you're in it. And it's going to be a big thing for you to drop, because it means going through the experience yourself rather than sharing it all the time with others. You see, sharing it all the time with others you think is a good thing for you, but it's actually a selfish thing. You're expecting others to take time out of their lives, many of which are hard lives too, in order to listen to you. And then a part of the codependency is you listen to them because they listen to you. But that doesn't benefit both parties. What would benefit you, either party, sorry, but what would benefit you is that you actually feel the pain and suffering of your childhood and feel through that process, be humble enough to feel through it, so that you no longer have the addiction that you need to be heard and are more prepared to listen instead. Because it's only by listening that's the first part. Remember I said to Claudia, education of you is the first part of growth, and then the second part of growth is you developing a sincere desire to absorb it and apply it, right? So when you're blocked to the first part, you're never going to get to the second part. And you've got to be really honest with yourself about that. Oh, I want people to listen to me and listen to how I feel about this and how I feel about that and what I believe about this and what I believe about that. But I'm not prepared to do the listening myself to get to the stage where and also get to the stage where I have a sincere desire to apply what I hear, right? Which is the only way things are going to change. Yeah.
Thank you.
No worries. Paul, you had your hand up?
I'm not sure about the question now, but it was about God and about seeking God's help along the way before we're sincere, or even if we feel like we've got dribs and drabs of sincerity.
Well, of course, if you have a drip of sincerity, then God will respond to that drip of sincerity. Does that make sense? The law measures your sincerity, and God's feelings measure your sincerity. Every moment you are sincere, and most people in their lives do have little moments here and there where they do or are sincere. And if your thoughts are and desires are directed towards God in those circumstances and situations, then of course there will be a response from God immediately, right? So most people do have a drip of it, you know, when you say dribs and drabs. I know that's a very, what is it, English term, I suppose it would be. But if we could say very minor desires, right?
Sporadic minor desires, yeah.
Sporadically expressed, you know, sometimes once every year. And under those circumstances, of course, God does respond immediately in that moment. But the problem with that whole concept is how many of those moments is it going to take for major change to occur? Can you see it sort of like, well, if I become sincere every moment, that's different to me having little drip and drab moments, isn't it? If I could learn to become sincere in every moment. Yeah. So the real secret is becoming sincere in every moment.
Yeah, and I guess my sort of ideally focus is God help me to remove the blocks which is stopping me.
He's not going to.
Sincere, or to become aware.
That's your
He's
addiction.
not going to do that either.
That's your addiction, Paul. That's what you always want from Paul.
That's right.
From God. What you need to ask from Paul, you ask from God. You know, you say, God, take away my blocks. God.
I don't want to have to develop awareness, so can you help me with it?
Yeah.
I don't want to have to awaken. Can you help me awaken? I don't want to have to go through this process myself. Can you help me do it? And God's going, well, none of that's sincere yet. Because until you want to do it for yourself, it's not sincere yet. Makes sense? So yes, you have this strong tendency to go to expect God to do what Paul needs to do for himself. Now, there are things that Paul can't do for himself. And one of those things is you can't give yourself God's love, can you? That has to come from God, right? And you can't give yourself God's truth. That has to come from God, right? So there are certain things that will come from God that God is already supplying, but then God is saying, no, there are certain things that Paul must do that has to come from Paul. And Paul's going, but I don't want it to come from me. I want it to come from you. You know, it's too hard for it to come from me. It's too hard work. It's too difficult. It's too, you know. So can you help me with it? Thanks. And God's go, what can I do? I have to wait until Paul goes, I don't need God's help to become more sincere. I need to just work on becoming more sincere myself. Does that make sense?
If God stepped in right now, Paul, you wouldn't feel it as a gift. You know, it's like you know, you've got your property up there and you get up one morning, you're like, I've got to dig a ditch. I've got to dig a ditch. It's going to be 2 meters long and 1 meter wide. It's up to me. If I don't do it by sundown.
That sounds more like a grave than a ditch.
Maybe my metaphors are getting get it done. It's going to be hard, it's a hot day, it's muggy out, but I'm going to get it done. And you got it done and you went to bed. If someone came along in the middle of you digging it, when you decide I'm going to get it done, you'd be like, oh, thank you so much, this is such a help. But if you, if we take the metaphor now back to your progression, basically what you're saying is, there's all this work I've got to do to remove my blocks, and God, come and dig it with me. You know, I can't do it, you've got to do it with me. You've got to do it for me, you know. And
God's already done everything God's going to do for Paul to help you remove your blocks. He's already done it. He's provided the truth that's going to help you with your blocks. He's provided the law of compensation that's going to help you measure that you're not removing your blocks. He's provided everything he's going to provide in order for you. He's provided some spirit help to help Paul remove his blocks. He's done everything external to Paul that he's capable, that is able to do without breaking your will, without breaking your personal exercise of your will. He's done everything already. He's already done that. By the way, not just for Paul, he's done that for every single person who's already lived and who will ever live.
And he's still doing it.
And he's still doing it.
Not like it's done and he's given up on us.
Right.
He's still doing all those things consistently every day for us.
Yeah. So God's already done what God's going to do. What God can't do is help Paul give up things that he doesn't want to give up. Because that's what a block is. A block is, I don't want to give up something. I don't want to, it's a block. That's why it's a block, because I don't want to give it up. He's not going to help you give up the things you don't want to give up. You're going to have to develop sincerity to give them up. He's not going to help you imbibe truth that Paul doesn't want to accept. Paul's going to have to choose to accept it. Right? He's not going to do that for you. Because if he could, you would no longer be a free will, self-aware being anymore, actually. Because he'd be doing all the things for you that you, as a free will, independent, self-aware being, would need to do for yourself. Right? So he can't do any of those things. He can only do what he's already done. Right? And that's the key thing to understand. God's already done it. What are you going to do? Right? What are you going to do? Are you going to keep going? But you haven't done enough. Because the average prayer, the average person who believes in God has towards God is, God, you haven't done enough, I want more.
This is hard. Fix it.
Yeah, that's right. What the average person's saying. You haven't done enough, I want you to do more in my case. I want you to make a special exception for me, because whatever we believe about ourselves deserves that special exception. But God can't. God's already done what God's going to do, what God's laws. He established those laws for a purpose, and so God is already doing everything he can possibly do that can be done towards a self-aware, independent being, and that unless the self-aware, independent being chooses to make some different choices and take some different actions and become more sincere internally, nothing more can be done. Makes sense?
And I guess at attempting to be sincere with God, inviting God into the process as well, without that addiction.
Well, this is where it gets very tricky, doesn't it? Because the average person who wants to invite God into a process generally is in the addiction.
Yeah.
Because they're not prepared to do something alone themselves, right? So, it's difficult to measure personal sincerity when you're coming from a place of addiction. It's like very, very difficult. The average person fails it, of course, because they don't have enough self-awareness yet to go, oh, here I am in an addiction doing that. Here I am in an addiction again doing that. They're not got that level of self-awareness to work that out yet. Now, God's going to require you to obtain that level of self-awareness, but you're not going to get it from God, because that's a personal thing you must do for yourself.
Yeah. And is it likely then, if I sort of feel God or we sort of think we feel God a bit at this time, that it's not God?
Very frequently. We talked about this a lot when we were overseas. The average person who thinks they've received divine love hasn't received God's love. They've just received feelings from spirits who are often out of harmony with God, who are willing to break God's laws in order to give you the illusion that you're doing well. And many men in particular are very prone to this. All the way around the world, we talked about this a lot when we were in England with the groups of young men there. They're very prone to it because many men have been taught from a young age that mummy would look after them and mummy will care for them and mummy will do all the things they don't, shouldn't have to do for themselves and all these kind of things. And so many of them have grown up to sort of believe that any good feeling they get, has to have come from the person they believe it should have come from.
From their sort of own goodness, from their good action. Oh, I got a good feeling because I took a good action, rather than, I got a feeling because I was in an addiction and someone was willing to meet it.
Yeah. And we talked about the codependence between spirits giving people on earth that feeling that when people are asking God for love, spirits giving them like addiction feelings, and then the people on earth thinking that that's love from God, right? It's a very the problem is it creates a strong state of delusion within the person. Does make sense? And quite frequently we see people who believe they've received lots of God's love when they've received none of it at all, and only been in addiction with spirits who have given the person the illusion that they're receiving love from God when actually it's just the codependent addiction with spirits. Yeah. So yeah, it makes you very prone to that. By not developing your own desire to have principles, you become very prone to external influences that are delusions, that are illusory. Yeah.
And I think that I sort of clock the addiction within myself a bit, and then sort of think, well, I'll forget about God.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a good thing either.
No.
Because then that's further away from.
Correct. Yeah. The average person who asks God for help and then feels like they don't receive it, then goes, well, I didn't receive it from God, so what's the point of asking anymore? Right? Instead of going, I didn't receive it because I wasn't sincere, I need to work on my sincerity, they're going, I didn't receive it because just God didn't want to give it. Or I didn't receive it, something's wrong with God. So
it's a blame of God, really. It's like, I'm withdrawing from you now because you didn't give me what I want, actually.
Yeah. And it's very similar to a relationship, isn't it? If you're in a relationship, let's say with a partner, and you're expecting something from them that they don't give, right? And you go, I don't want to be with you anymore. It's the same response, you see. And it indicates the lack of sincerity on a number of levels. And it also indicates anger, that you're not getting what you want as well. So it requires more sincerity and more self-awareness to go, here I go again. I'm denying something of God. God didn't give it. And here I go again going, I'm just going to walk away then and not bother with you. Because many of us have learned that this is sort of like a punishment. This is how some of you punished your parents when you were young. Some of you learned that you could punish them by withdrawing from them whenever they disappointed you in one way or the other, whenever they didn't give you what you wanted. Many people learn that during their teenage years. Like, I want to go out, Mum. No, you're not allowed to. And then they sulk for a week, and Mum can't bear it after a week, and so she lets them go out, right? And they learnt that this is how they can deal with anybody, and so they believe this is what they're going to be able to do with God. Right? But it's all a product of insincerity. Yeah.
Thank you.
No worries. Alan?
Is the difference between sincerity based on lack of selfishness but more moving towards aspiration? So when you guys came, you were your aspiration was to do what you're doing now.
Yep.
And you got some sort of like Mary was describing, you're creating a framework, and it's not about you, it's about what you can give to everyone else.
Yeah, and love also, of love of God and what God has, you know, desiring the qualities that God has. Sorry, Tom. Yeah.
No, it's not. A lot of times when you're in a place of sincerity, it's no longer about you, it's about the principle. So for an example of that is, Mary and I don't travel because we like it, right? We travel because the principle is, it gives us opportunities to love people face to face, right? So that's the principle, right? So it's a lot better, people can feel love more when you are in their face loving them, versus when you're over the other side of the world just talking about loving them. You understand the difference, don't you? It's like, if one of your daughters lives in UK?
In
Germany, Italy. So imagine you just say, like, you just think, oh, I love my daughter, next week you love your daughter, whatever. Unless you can sort of visit them face to face and express that love for them, unless they won't let you do that, of course. But if they do, then that gives you a greater opportunity, doesn't it, to demonstrate your love for them, than just doing it like by feeling, right? So it's good to have the feelings, but the actions are also important. So for us, it's like we love the principles. We know that they are going to benefit every person that ever hears them, just like they've benefited us, right? So our motivation for sharing truth isn't to gain some kind of worldwide recognition or worldwide popularity or, you know, followings of millions of people. You know, it reminds me of that guy we met, you know, had 3.5 million YouTube subscribers. He was sitting right next to me, this guy that I met at Charlotte Airport in the US, and he's got a ministry, you know, talking about Jesus, right? And he, you know, he's talking about, you know, how Jesus has helped him so much here and helped him so much there, and he's got this 3.5 million YouTube subscribers, and he's got a little team of people who do all of his videos for him, and he's got this huge YouTube channel, as you can imagine, and he was travelling with 2 or 3 of his helpers at the same time, and his whole desire was for popularity, for lots of people to adore him, right? And completely out of harmony with love, completely out of harmony with principle, actually. And he didn't realise how unprincipled he was being in terms of what he was doing with people either, because there was this terrible spirit scam going on with him as well, that he didn't understand at all, and didn't want to understand even. I had no desire to know about at all. And he was perfectly happy to do that. So that's not what Mary and I are happy to do. A lot of people think that's what we want by saying we're Jesus and Mary, but it's not what we want. What we want is to be able to share principles with people and see what happens. And we don't even feel like we're responsible for what happens. We just want to share the principles and see what happens. That's really all we want. Now, of course, that's the primary reason why the 14 come to Earth, is to share principles and see what happens, right? And the Earth does give you great opportunity to do this, like not on Earth, not just on Earth, but with spirits as well, while you're on Earth. So we love doing that, but it's all about the principles, loving the principles. Yeah. So unless in your life becomes all about loving the principles and then how you can express your personality through loving the principles, you're not going to find you have a very happy life.
I can see it, you know, I just saw it today, the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. so most people live a life on earth that's very like self-evolved, isn't it? It's like you have children, you have your work, you have your house, you have your, your possessions, you have your friends, holidays, all of those things, right? So you have all of those things, but all of it primarily for most people is just for themselves. And as a result of that, most people live quite unprincipled lives. And as a result of that, most people are pretty unhappy. And for good reason, because while you're living an unprincipled life, there will also be a lot of laws you break because of the lack of principles in life. So what a lot of what people call I lived a good life on earth is really interesting from God's perspective, because from God's perspective, most people have wasted their life on earth. Yeah. And it's interesting when you meet the people when they pass in the spirit world, because a lot of people in the first sphere, when they pass into the first sphere, and they believe they were good people. Like, in fact, many of them will say to you exactly what they would have said to you if you met them on earth, and that is, I've tried to be a good person in my day-to-day life. Many people will say that to you. And they're still in the first sphere. So your definition of a good person is obviously not God's definition of a good person. They're two very, very different definitions. And unless you're principled, you will never understand God's definition of what it means to be a good person. Yeah. So most people make a lot of sacrifices of principles in order to be a good person, so-called, only to find the negative results of that after they pass, generally. Yeah. So very important to understand that unless you become a principled person as God defines the principles to be, not as I define the principles to be, but as God defines them to be, unless you become a principled person as God defines one, then naturally you're going to pass thinking you're principled, but finding out that the results of your actions are put you firmly in the first sphere, and then you're going to have to learn that you weren't as principled as you believed you were. And that's a big challenge for most people. Yeah.
So, in that process, do you gather all the principles, or do you kind of focus on, a few at a time, or are they just so interchangeable that?
Well, what are the 5 things we've been focusing you on?
Truth.
So love, truth, humility, faith, principled action. Yeah. If you can focus on those 5 things primarily, your life will substantially change very rapidly. Right? Now, in each one of those 5 things, there are you could call them sub-points or sub-ideas in each one of those things. And we've talked a bit about that. We talked a bit about that when we're travelling as well, where you sort of have, aspects of equality. And there are many, many aspects of equality. And as you grow, you will start learning that every sort of quality, such as truth, has hundreds of aspects to it that are a part of truth, what it means to be truthful. But you could if you focus firstly on those 5 principles, those 5 big ones, then every other principle has some linkage to those 5.
Well, and even between the 5, you start to feel how much truth is so crucial to true humility, and how much love is a part of truth, and how much truth and faith are intertwined. Yeah. But that's why last week we talked about starting the love affair with each principle, falling in love with them, seeking them out, feeling the nuances of each of them.
Getting to know them.
Yeah.
And, this is when Deidre earlier asked the issue about, humility, what was involved in humility with the island discussion we had. And we didn't get to talk about all the nuances of humility, like what's involved in humility. But you can see that if we had audiences that just wanted to know that, then you could share that quite easily. But what generally happens is that we start talking about a principle, And almost everybody in the audience just detunes and thinks, this doesn't really apply to my life in a practical way. This is not really benefiting me, getting out of my pain and suffering. And by feeling all of these things, the average person is actually showing to us they have no understanding of the benefit of the principle, right? But also, in feeling those things, it makes it very difficult to discuss the principles, because now we're going against the will of the group, trying to have a discussion that the majority in the group don't want to have, right? And so that makes it very difficult to share these things. And so over the last 15 or 16 years that we've been teaching many of you, you've made it very difficult to share some fundamental truths without you really even understanding how. You've been making it difficult because your will has been, I don't want to live by the principle. Just, many of you have had the view, just tell me what the right thing to do is and I'll do that. You know, just make it easier for me to know what the right thing is to do, and I'll do it. Don't worry about that. So many of you realise that after a while that maybe you're not that sincere about doing it either. But you can see that many people on earth basically want a cult leader. They want somebody who will magically, who you just got to follow what they say, and all of a sudden all your life gets fixed. That's really what they want. They want that without actually having any sincerity.
Without digging their own ditch. Brave / bad thing. Putting in a bit of effort.
Yeah, so because we want that, and we're desperate to have this sort of other kind of influence, which basically is, tell me what to do and I'll do it, and that will hopefully make my life easier. Many of you are so prone to being misled as well. And not only misled by people on earth who are false teachers, but also misled by spirits as well, misled by them for the same reason, because when they tell you something you want to hear, you follow that, and when they tell you something you don't want to hear, you don't follow that. And so, you know, at the end of the day, a lot of the things that God's going to tell you in terms of developing sincerity and educating you in truth are going to be things you don't want to hear right at the moment. You know, but you're going to have to develop a desire to hear it in order for God to even share it with you. Right? So God wants to share a lot of things with you, but can't, because you're exercising your will to not know, to not want, to not desire. Right? And so God can't share under those circumstances. Other people will, and particularly spirits will, who are in dark conditions will. And so this is why many people finish up getting quite influenced strongly by spirits who are very negative, because they'd rather listen to them than listen to God or truth. But the more sincere you become, the less that's going to happen. There are so many benefits to living by the principle. The average person on earth has no awareness at all about how many benefits would come to their life instantly if they lived more principally in harmony with God's principles. You know? And we see that all the time. And like oftentimes when we're talking to groups, and this happened while we're overseas, you'll be talking about a principle and 10 minutes later, like everybody's turned off. The whole audience just gone. And then when you start talking about cats or dogs, it's like the whole audience lights up. You know, they're arguing with you and fighting with you, but they're passionately involved now in the conversation. Does that make sense? Not understanding that just before we were talking about principles and nobody was there, nobody was in that state, and the principles are what's going to solve that problem, the problem of pets as well as the other problems that you raised. But nobody seems to get that because they are not understanding how important developing a principle is within inside yourself. Ivana?
So you mentioned before, instead of focusing on the sin, focus on the principle.
Yep.
Could you please give an example? I feel like I've just...
Yeah, sure. Last week we gave some examples too.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I haven't listened.
No, it's all good. We haven't edited last week either. Just an example. Let's say you've got the principle. What do we choose this week? Different
What
ways.
did we choose last week?
I can't quite remember. Truth, that's right. Yeah, I was going to choose truth again, so
Yeah.
that's the problem. Okay, let's choose a different one. So let's say you're going to act in, you're going to work on the principle of developing faith. Example. So faith is, firstly you would have to educate yourself about what it is. So what is faith? Faith is the assured expectation of the things you hope for in your future. In other words, what you put faith in now is where you'll be headed, where you'll direct your life. So if you put faith in making lots of money, and you think making lots of money will be good for you, then you'll develop a life to make lots of money.
You focus all your attention
You'll
on
focus
it.
all your attention on it.
All your aspiration will go in that direction. Your
Yeah,
thoughts will be
desires.
about it. Your actions will be about it.
Yeah, I was like that in my 20s. I decided I was going to, become a bit more wealthy than I was, And so I decided the way to do that was to get property. And so I became so focused on, most of my everyday thoughts were about, in my late, which is probably early 30s.
Yeah.
And most of my everyday thoughts were, how do I develop this property? How do I find that property? How do I get the money to do this? How do I do that? Almost every day of my life was now consumed by that, because that's what I had faith in. And I did finish up with $4 million worth of property as a result.
But didn't you also have a lot of debt?
I did, but I had about $8 million worth of property and about $4 million of debt. So, that's one thing I learnt about property, is that people who generally want to make money in the world will end up with debt as well as income. Like some of the most, the biggest multi-billionaires in the world now have been in huge amounts of debt, and by the way, still are in huge amounts of debt, many of them. But what they own is more than what they're in debt for. That's one of the things you learn about money. Not a very good thing to learn about it, but it's one of the things you learn. Now, if you look at that, that was a desire. As soon as I realised who I was, that desire just disappeared overnight. I no longer have that desire anymore. Like it just, I just had one or two feelings, and bang, those desires just went. And I then thought, what a pointless desire I had. Having that desire, what a waste of my life having that desire, So I went from it being like the thing that consumed my thoughts through my 30s for the most part, not all, but until by the time I was 40 now, I didn't have that desire at all, not at all. In fact, I thought, well, I've got to stop all that now. So I had the complete opposite desire. So the faith drew me into a different direction. I now have faith in a different thing. That makes sense? And that drew me off into a different course. But let's look at the principle. Faith, after that I realised, faith is me feeling that something can be obtained in my future. And if I really felt that was like, with my whole heart, I really felt that was true, then I would obtain it. Right? In other words, I would start to feel like I already had it before I even had it. And that drew these things to me. Right? The principle of faith. Now, I realised at that point that actually I was living in a place of faith, but just in the corrupt version of it. Makes sense? So this helped me go, okay, the principle is I must exercise desire in order to achieve something, and that desire, properly expressed in my heart, will lead me into achieving that thing. But I also could see that the choice of the thing was very important.
That's where the potential for the
That's
sin
where the
was.
potential for the sin was. Right? So the principle being, this principle of faith is a very important thing to develop with your life. You will not achieve anything unless you develop faith in your life. But if you focus your faith on the wrong thing, it can make a mess of your life. Right? So in that process, I learnt those two things. I learnt the principle, what it was, but I also learnt that its direction was important. So now whenever I look at anything for my future, I'm going, okay, whatever is going to come up in the future, I've got to look at those two things. I've got to look at, firstly, I can achieve anything that I have faith in. Secondly, what I have faith in is very important. I must make the right choice. Make the choice to put the faith in the right thing. Right? And that has helped me now make decisions about almost everything we do. Like Mary will attest to that, won't babe? It's like almost everything I do now, it's go, okay, we can do it, but is it right to do that thing? You know, we can do this thing, but is it the thing we should be putting our faith in? Now, what that means is when it comes to making any choice for our future now, we don't make a single choice that's out of harmony with those two principles. In other words, we don't do anything that we don't want to do, that we don't have a desire to create for our future. And secondly, we don't do anything if it's out of harmony with love.
So I guess one thing that I really struggle with is working out whether or not something is in or out of harmony with love. Like
in other words, the what you should do.
yeah, and like we were talking about money, I've been very focused since I've had this job that I'm currently doing.
Yep.
For 2.5 years, I've
Yep.
been focusing on earning money and like saving for a deposit for a house.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I definitely feel like I focus on that, and it's like
Well, I had 13 houses and they didn't bring me any happiness.
yeah.
So
But sorry now.
can you see the focus on that thing
Yeah.
is going to be out of harmony with love? It's not going to
Yeah,
be.
because it's like I'm compromising within my job. I know that I'm compromising like love and truth and like because I just feel I'm sorry. Just so everyone else who's listening knows, I'm a disability support worker, and so it's like part of my role is to give the clients choice and control. So it's like even if they've got
The wrong
an
choice.
addiction,
Yeah.
we actually like
Help them.
Enable it.
yeah, so I know that and like, how the last time that I came to a living room talk, you were talking to me a bit about my, to do with men.
Yep.
And then with my arthritis and stuff.
Yep.
And then so I've got so many male clients so it's like, I know that I'm still doing the thing that you were talking to me about within my job.
Yep.
And then it's like, I'm driven by wanting to earn money.
Yep.
So it's like,
So can we just rewind, because you said I find it hard to distinguish what is loving and what is not.
You're not really.
But
Okay,
you don't
alright,
find it hard.
okay.
This is where the principles
yeah,
come in.
alright. So
This
I'm
is
not
what, no,
being
just wait on for a second.
sure.
This is where the principles come in.
First point, got to listen to it.
Yeah. When most of us want to say, I don't know, I'm an innocent sinner, I'm just wandering around innocently sinning. But if we really love principles, as your example exactly points out, you are saying, I know the loving principle. Enabling people to meet their addictions is not love.
But your
knows that.
faith is saying, I want a certain thing for my future.
Yeah.
So
So
I'm willing to
compromise the principles.
In other words, the what you've chosen, so there's two parts of the faith. One is knowing that you can create something for your future, and you're now starting to learn, I can create some things for my
Yeah.
future.
And it's probably the first time in my life that
Which
I've
is-
actually felt like that. And it's kind of
Which is
sad
good.
because I just,
We know this too about you.
We know
We
this.
know.
Yeah,
Yes.
we know this already. And it's good that you now know this, that you can create something for your future. Ivana can put her heart into something and get it done. Do you know what I mean? That's a good thing to know. It's just what now I choose for my future